Last time, I showed my process of creating a reference for a 3D character in an NPR style. For this video, I'll be taking the base reference and creating a body from it, showing my methods along the way. This is an ongoing series where I'll be making the character in full while giving some tips along the way. So if you don't want to miss future updates, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Now without further ado, let's get stuck in. First thing is to import my reference image. I do this by just dragging and dropping my file into Blender. With the image selected, there is a property button here to adjust various parameters, such as the image size. It is important to get the image aligned to the correct axis, but this is personal preference. For me, I have the front view running along the x-axis, which is the red arrow, so that the green arrow, which is the y-axis, points out from the back of the image. The center of the character needs to be aligned with the scene origin. This is so I can apply a mirror modifier later. I set up the side view perpendicular to the front. If your images are on the same sheet like mine, you can press Shift D to duplicate it and rotate it on the z-axis 90 degrees. As for the back view, I overlay it on the front image and don't change its rotation, as that can be set up on the properties later. For all images, I set the depth to front and reduce the opacity down. This is so they appear in front of my mesh while allowing me to still see what I'm doing. I also set orthographic and axis alignment on. This is so the image is only visible when the camera is locked to specific angles. As for the side settings, it's set to front and back respectively, but for the side view, it is set to both. Now with this setup, the numpad can be used to align the camera. 1 moves it to the front, Control 1 to the back, and 3 to the side. By hitting 5, you can toggle orthographic mode, which removes all depth from the camera. This allows more accurate alignment between the mesh and the reference. Now that the images are set up, I can put them in a collection and press this button here that restricts them from being selected in the scene view while I work. There are a few viable methods to modeling characters. One of the most common ones is by subdividing and extruding from a box. When I first started learning, this is how I'd model. However, my preferred method is the approach I'll be using in this video. If you're new, I suggest giving both methods a try and see what works best for you, but personally I find that my method is better for laying out good typology and getting volume in the right places. First, to start with a basic quad, setting the object's position to the scene's origin. I place it just below the navel and set up the mirror modifier with clipping and merge on. The axis buttons along the top depend on how you set up your images. For me, I want the mirror to be along the x-axis. I pull the edge to clip at the center and drag the opposite side to the hip and extrude it out until I have a basic ring around the character. The idea is to start simple and slowly add detail with ring cuts, filling out the shape. This ring consists of 12 faces, 24 when you factor in the mirror. You can turn your statistics on in the viewport overlays, so you can see your face count easier at the side here. You will see as I go, I mark areas in different colours using some materials I set up at the side. This is to keep track of important loops. Here I am setting up another ring for the thigh that I will subdivide more later. This blue loop is to get the shape of the pelvis. It outlines the groin and the underside of the glutes, curving around up the side of the hip. Now for another loop for the rib cage, connecting it to the pelvis with another blue line to mark the shape of the abdomen. This red line I'm creating here will run down, under and then back up to mark the spine. It'll help a lot when it comes to blocking out some areas later on. I'm marking the upper knee here, matching the face count with the thigh, which I believe is 10 at the moment. This will allow me to do my first bit of filling out by selecting opposite edges and hitting the F key to bridge them. Then, by selecting the perpendicular edge of the newly created face, I can repeatedly hit F to fill out the area. I will be making another yellow loop under the knee, which is 8 faces. It is 2 less than the upper knee because I will create a blue loop around the kneecap to give it shape. Now with a ring around the ankle to match the lower knee, I can create the basic shape of the calf. Despite my reference image not being perfect, I will follow it closely and focus on typology, and later I will make a lot of adjustments and diverge from it. Once I'm done with the knee, I head back to the pelvis. I create a new yellow loop that briefly connects to the blue one. This will help give me some volume to fill out the glutes and the groin. Within the crease areas, I spend a little time working out how to best set up the geometry. If I end up with a triangle, I try to eliminate it and turn it back into a quad. The main reason to retain quads is so you can have an easier time creating loop cuts to add detail when required. With that said, triangles can still be useful in specific circumstances, so don't write them off, use them when necessary. With the pelvis's shape blocked out, I needed to find a way to connect it to the leg, so I ended up adding a few loop cuts at the back. In hindsight, it may have been better to hold off modelling the knee until afterwards, because I had to reshape the leg a little to make this work. Either way, the goal here was to fill the area between the two yellow rings. The front was relatively easy as I lined up the geometry, but with the back, I had to be a little bit more creative with my quads to reduce the number of faces as we entered the leg. It's also worth mentioning that sometimes quads have a tendency to flex in the wrong position, creating this jagged look in the geometry. That is because every quad consists of two triangles, and they're currently not aligned correctly. The way to fix this is by using the knife tool to cut the quad in the correct way, essentially turning it into two triangles. With the newly created edge selected, you can press X and hit dissolve edge, returning it back to a quad, while retaining its new arrangement. I find the combination of these two tools is useful for rearranging typology in general, by cutting a path and dissolving unwanted edges. Sometimes you'll see me mark triangles with a red material. This is to remind me that I need to come back and rework the area later. While filling out the waist area, I decided to add in this blue arc that traces around the top of the hip. This helped give needed volume to the area while reducing the geometry required to connect into the ribs. Now I'm moving to the upper body, so I'm marking a blue ring here for the breasts, and then I will create a yellow ring around to the spine to make it easier to fill out the body later. Here I'm filling out the sternum and marking the clavicle with some quads. The placement of my collarbone on the drawing turned out to be far too low, so eventually I'll adjust it to make it work better. These 4 quads mark the edges I will need to reduce my geometry down to. Our blue ring consists of 24 edges, and this cap is 8. First I created a yellow ring of 16 faces, but later I changed my approach here, so I'll explain when the time comes. Extrude around the cap and triangulate the quads at the corners. This essentially turns one edge into 2 faces. Do this with 4 faces and you add 8 faces in total. So within a couple of rings we go from 8 to 24. so I'll admit they look comically bad, pretty much giant torpedoes. There is enough geometry to shape them later, but the main problem really is my drawing. You'll see at the end of how much I diverge from it to get a better shape. The next few minutes will consist of me tweaking as I am not satisfied with the shape, until I eventually move on to filling out more of the mesh to get a better idea where to go. The loop I'm making here is to transition the shoulder into the arm. I tried to get the shape of the lats and the armpit, but if I'm honest, this area was the biggest headache for me. It would have probably been worth constructing the shoulder first, similar to how I did the pelvis when I connected it into the leg. Instead I ended up filling out the body first, resulting in a lot of time spent trying to get my edges to line up. The upper body area is where I feel I need the most practice. I haven't entirely worked out the most effective way to construct it, so a lot of this is trial and error. I created a yellow ring here for the neck, so it's a case of working out how to connect this to all the surrounding marked areas. I marked the clavicle here. It needs to run into the shoulder somehow, so I'll try a few different methods to try and make that work. Here I have a couple of blue triangles to create a visible step for the shoulder blade. I leave it fairly exaggerated for now and smooth it out a lot later.
the first time I use some sculpting tools here to smooth out the back. The tools I use the most are the grab tool, which is great for general tweaking, the smooth tool to neaten up some of the geometry, and the inflate tool to add and remove volume to areas that need it. You'll notice that the mat cap is set to this brown clay. Changing this can help locate imperfections and deformation in the mesh. You can change it by pressing the down arrow at the top here. Now that my urge to sculpt has been satisfied, it's back to fixing the issues with the chest and filling out the rest of the geometry. Here I have a bit of an issue with the mirror modifier merging vertices that I don't want it to. To fix this I had to turn clipping and merge off and shift the verts back manually. This can happen a lot as a result of sculpting, so keep an eye out for it. The blue area is to give shape and volume to the shoulder, but I eventually shifted around towards the front, as the bulk of the muscle is there and not directly on the top. I spent a lot of time messing around with this, not really finding a solution. I suggest if you find yourself in this situation to take a break and come back with a fresh mind, which is what I did eventually. Now with the headache out of the way, I can work on the arm. It was here I realised my drawing wasn't good enough, so I did find a few references to try and improve its shape. And like the knee, I haven't worked out the best way to create the elbow yet, so I'll be experimenting a lot here. There is an indent on top of the elbow that I'm trying to replicate here. I tried inserting some faces using the I key to give me more to work with. The shiny matte cap I'm using here is really good for seeing imperfections in the mesh's normals. I tend to use this a lot when it comes to polishing the mesh at the end. Now I'm going back to the legs and adding some loop cuts because the detail here is still fairly low. I'm scaling the loops on each axis individually to align them with my reference. For the most part, this is it for the geometry. The remainder of the footage is where I am making a lot of adjustments. I did do a lot later when not recording, so I'll let the remainder of the footage play out and then show and explain the major changes I made to the model at the end. This is the final result. Without a subdivision surface and mirror modifier on, it's 2,223 tries. With them on, it's at 17k. Generally for base bodies, I aim between 15 and 25k, but it really does depend on what you're making it for. After I've added hands and feet, it may come closer to 30k. I suggest modelling without subdivision on and get the shape as close as possible. You can see here, for example, some of the shape is lost as a result of the modifier, so areas like this will require some extra attention. This teal line is a sharp. When you have auto smoothing enabled, it will split the normals along it. If I remove the line, you can see I get this ugly dark patch in the shading. Since we'll be using a cell shader of some description, I will probably create a shader proxy anyway, but that is for a future video. The purple line is a crease. In edge mode, you can see the menu here has an option for it. Marking edges with this calls the modifier to adjust these edges to be closer to the original mesh. Without them marked, you can see it's trying to smooth them out, and with it activated, it creates this harsher crease. Added some extra shape to the clavicle as well, such as this triangle, and some extra geometry for the tendon in the neck. I'd say this isn't really necessary, as you can add this kind of detail through texture later. I had to do a lot of work to the back, sinking it more between the shoulder blades. I also created this depression in the mid area that smooths out as it comes down toward the tailbone. As for the chest and front, you will see it barely follows my reference anymore. I ended up gathering some reference images and spent some time getting a better shape. Personally, I find it easier to work with 3D than drawing, so this is a good example of that. I also added a few more loops here and there to add more detail, like around the groin area. At the back, there is a tiny red triangle as a result of it. As I said earlier, triangles can be useful, so don't shy away from using them occasionally. To conclude, I think generally the typologies turned out quite well, with a few areas that could be improved. The neck and shoulder area caused me the most issues, so in future I'll try and find some better solutions there. Hopefully you guys found this helpful and enjoyed the video. If you did, hit the like button and leave a comment. If you have a question, ask away, or if you have any insights, feel free to share. I'll be moving on to hands and feet next, so if you want to follow the process, make sure to subscribe. I'll be creating this entire character that includes face, hair, clothing, texturing and shading. As always, thank you to my patrons. You can support me there too by pressing the link in the description. My videos get released there early. If you want to see how I made the 2D reference for this model, you can watch the previous video by clicking here. And if you want to do none of that, would you kindly bugger off?
Maybe.